Welcome to another episode of Till the Bottom. Today we talk music. We have with us Dr. Irina Naumovska, who is a pianist coming from Macedonia. Here, she tells us a bit about the journey one takes to be a professional musician. Further, we explore a bit on structure and experimentation in classical music and how it has evolved over the last century. Interspersed with this discussion, we ponder if there is any objectivity in music, or even in art in general. How much of why a piece of art being good depends on its narrative and context, and how much of it is purely empirical. Intrigued? Then let's start talking.
Welcome to another episode of Till the Bottom. We are your hosts, Mitra and Nacho, and today we have for you here Dr. Irina Naumovska. She is a doctor in musical arts and she's also a professional pianist. So we are, just for a change, this time we are going to talk about actually what she does for a living, which is kind of a different venue than the one we usually take. We just grab random topics that interest us. This one is both. It's a topic that interests us, and we have somebody here who knows everything we expect about the topic, or we're gonna delve into it and see how deep we can scratch.
We're not sure if we know everything about anything, but yes, we can start.
We're gonna try at least to dig as deep as we can in the topic. First of all, of music, and probably we'll get into some sort of more abstract conceptions about what is art, what's of value in art, what's beauty, etc. But because we are both very curious about the career path of a professional musician, we thought that we would start in a quasi-interview mode, where we'll ask you to summarize for us a little bit how is it that you become a professional pianist, and what is, generally speaking, the career path of a professional pianist. And I think a good way to start, at least something that I'm very curious about, is how do you actually realize that what you would like to study, what you would like to dedicate your life to, it's music? How did it happen in your case?
First of all, hello to both of you. I'm very honored to be on your podcast because I heard some of it and I really like it.
Thank
you.
It's
a pleasure for me. So in my case, how I started, both of my parents are very cultural and highly educated people who thought that it's a good idea, in order for their children to have a general culture, to pursue music education. So when my brother was 7 years old, they bought a piano and they engaged a private teacher, and she would come to our house twice a week and he would have a lesson. I was 3 years old at the time. And I was so enchanted with the piano and what were they doing that I would always sit on her lap and observe everything. And then I would try to repeat whatever my brother was doing at the moment. So when I was 5.5 years old, this professor told my parents that I might have a real talent and real musicality, and that I should maybe go to a real music school.
Did your brother feel bad when he heard that?
My brother felt bad many years after because he quit playing the piano, and then he felt sorry because he was just under pressure from his friends from school because it was not cool to be a male and to play the piano at that time.
So
his environment.
So the decision of playing music starts at the beginning of your education itself.
Yes.
And already there are schools where you start learning music from the age of 5 for the
so the system in my country, it differs. In Germany, in the UK, in United States, they have a different system. In my country, the system is so that you have a normal primary school, and then you have parallel state school of music. And if you pass the entrance exam, so if the commission thinks that you have some kind of musical sense, then you can study music. So when I was 5.5, I passed the exam, and I went to 1 year of preparation studies where you learn basic harmony theory, the notes, the keys. And then next year at 6.5, I started learning the instrument. And somehow, since I was 6 years old, whenever somebody would ask me, what do you want to become? I would say, I want to be a pianist. So for me, it was clear that this is what I want to do. And I never questioned whether I should or shouldn't be.
So you never went through this very common mini existential crisis when people don't know what it is what they want to do for a living. Which career should I choose? At 6 years old, you already knew.
Because this is kind of insane, right? Like you had regular education along with that. Also.
Yes, exactly.
And pretty much everyone who joins music school at the age of 6 is becoming a musician.
No, of course not. But of course I had some crises and some moments where my friends would go out and play all day, and I had to go to music school or practice or prepare a concert or not go to a holiday, and then I would say, I don't want to do this next year, and then my father would say, okay, you do this until the end of this year, and then we decide. So my parents were never pushing me, you must, and at the end I would always want to.
But it was never the kind of crisis that a lot of people have, where they are even wondering what is it that they actually like.
No.
How would they want to invest the rest of their career if they are not quite sure that this is the particular activity of their preference? So you never had that kind of...
So I was very fortunate that since I was 8 years old, in my school there were a lot of pedagogues and professors from all around the world that would come and give master classes. And so I was 8 years old, and I was studying with these university professors who never had such a young student. And then they would try to explain to me how this music world exists.
So you're talking about the music school?
Yes, in the music school.
Okay, just one question there, because I'm very ignorant about how this path actually is. So you had let's say, quote unquote, normal education, like elementary school.
Exactly. And then twice a week you go and have 4 lessons in the music school. So you have solfeggio, which is basic theory and harmony of music, and then you have an individual piano lesson in my case, or another instrument if you play other instrument. And this happens so twice a week. You just go in the afternoon if you were at the morning. If you were at the school, then you go in the afternoon. But nevertheless, you have to practice the instrument every day, even if it's like 30 minutes. When you are very young, your attention is not so long, but you exercise it. And the earlier you start, the earlier you start, the more like your capacity for attention, of course, expands.
So, but people come from all age brackets. So in the music school,
no, in this school, you have to start at the latest at 8 years old. Okay. After that, you are too old to become a professional musician.
Boy. Yeah, talk about pressure.
Then you can go to a private school, but this is how the state school was organized. Yes, so yes, I was very happy in that school.
I have a question.
But it's a bit like sports, right? Like
exactly.
You have to start early, or you just forget about it. Yes. So it's basically like how it works with sports as well.
Yes, because you practice motor actions. So it's motor activities that you also learn. So you have to connect the symbols that you're reading, so the notes. So you have to decode all this system and to translate it into motor actions that are used by both hands, and then you have to evaluate this action by hearing and sound, by hearing and sight. So the earlier you start, the better you will develop.
Okay.
It's very difficult to start professionally to play the piano at 13 or 14. There are some examples of famous pianists who did this, but it's very rarely.
These are the exceptions.
The exception, yes. And I assume they had this motor skill.
Probably there are biological reasons for why it is more efficient.
Probably you would know more about this.
Well, I'm just guessing for the most part,
But this structure of musical education is also something recent, right? Or this structure for this music schooling has been there for years,
since
decades.
My parents were children. My mother was going to musical school like that, and my father as well. So they had this system since at least the 50s. Yeah. I don't know before, I don't think so, but at least maybe even so.
Okay.
And then when you finish the primary music school, you can decide, do you want to go to musical high school, or you don't want to, you want to play for yourself. you can decide. I went to musical high school, so it's
how
like
old are you when you finished?
You're 14.
14.
So then musical high school is like a normal high school. So you learn all the subject, biology, chemistry, mathematics, literature, everything. And then you have also these musical subjects like counterpoint, like harmony, conducting, of course, the instrument. So all these subjects are included in your
But
education.
then obviously you are surrounded by all people that already want
Yes,
to do music,
yes.
right?
So
Exclusively.
all your
It's
colleagues are musicians.
I imagine that might be a very
Yes.
particular kind of crowd.
We had 3 classes in my high school. So one was the specialist performers. The other ones were the children, the people who studied theory of music, and the other ones were the ballet department.
Okay, so it was dance and music.
Yes, that must be a very special kind of crowd.
It was fantastic. It was the best years of
Really?
my life because, and these people are still my friends, and they're some of them are very successful musicians, and they live all around the world.
Because this will be the crowd which has the ambition to do music in the future.
Yes. So you are already set. You know what you want to study. You know what you want to do with your life. It's very rarely that you go to musical high school and then you don't go to the academy, to study at the academy. I only have one example from my class, and I think she studied at the academy and then she turned to business.
Okay. I have a question which might be very out of place. Maybe I'm just letting myself be guided through stereotype, but just tell me if it's right or wrong. Because the way I imagine this kind of crowd, I imagine them to be the kind of people that knew, for the most part, generally speaking, at a very young age, that this is what they wanted to be.
I guess
that there was that this particular moment, this particular lack of crisis that you had was probably quite common among
I
this
think
crowd.
so too. Yes, I don't think that any of my friends were questioning whether they want to be. When you reach this age of 14, you already are aware that this is your path.
Yeah, and that decision was taken even earlier on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and probably most people are coming from a place of privilege also. Like they're all from very good backgrounds.
No. No.
So there are people coming from...
Yes.
Okay.
So but for the most part, what would you...
Most part would not, of my colleagues were not coming from a privileged background. Because
that is very counterintuitive.
Because the school is for free. So mostly they're the opposite of the privileged background. So normal people without a lot of money or anything. Some of them had parents musicians. Some of them didn't. But so when you have this free system, anybody who wants to or who has the ability or the talent can become a musician because you don't pay for the school.
Yeah, that's definitely counterintuitive.
It's not a private, it's not
but regardless
it's counterintuitive because we don't look at music as a viable option for earning an income.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you don't come from a place of privilege, then you're mostly getting into engineering or
regardless of whether the school is private or public, the reason why it's counterintuitive is it's precisely that. For instance, I'm a physicist, you're a physicist too. And we come from countries, in my case Mexico, and in your case India, that are not first world countries.
Yes.
And the socioeconomic status for a large part of the population is not necessarily good. So typically what happens is that the people that, for instance, I encounter in my faculty that went to do physics or mathematics or this kind of pure natural sciences tended to be people from, if not wealthy, of well-off backgrounds.
Yes.
Because these are the kind of people that can even, fantasize with the idea of let's it's a little bit of like a throwing the dice, right? Because these are not the kind of careers that you look at and think, this is how I'm going to make a living, this is how I'm going to get ahead socioeconomically speaking.
Yeah, so I must say I come from a socialist country, and this discrepancy was not so big at my growing up.
Okay.
So everybody had approximately the same amount of money or the same income. So we never observed the future profession in that manner. I never thought of it in that manner.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't really want to get too much into this kind of controversy right now. But we've been mentioning my country. I come from this country. How is the system in your country? And I think we are somehow in a position in which we just need to name the country. Which country you come from?
So, most currently, my country is called North Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very difficult for me to even say it because for almost 6 years, I was from Macedonia. So now I come from North Macedonia.
Now you come from North Macedonia.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can leave this kind of discussion for another occasion, probably off camera, but there's a lot of controversy around this issue, and probably a lot of feelings too involved from the interested parties. But,
yes, I must say that musicians are usually cosmopolitan people and don't like to be squeezed into some term or concept about belonging, because we really travel a lot. We meet people from all around the world, and it was never a situation where I had to defend myself. Where do I come from, or why is that a problem? And
yeah, probably it's also part of the stereotype I have in my mind, but I imagine a lot of people that are into music or professional musicians to be rather progressive people.
I think so.
Kind of.
Yes.
There's a trait, one of the big personality traits, open-mindedness, and the people that choose like creative career paths tend to score high in this open-mindedness, and they also tend to be very open to experience and generally progressive.
It's very difficult to be close-minded when you're 10 or 11 years old and you go around the world and you meet all these different people, and how can you be close-minded? You work with them, you play with them, you go to seminars, you create something together, you play in a chamber orchestra or ensemble, and then I don't understand this close-mindedness.
So that obviously brings us to the point. So your musical education involved you traveling around the world, even as a young kid?
Yes, of course, with the great support of my parents. But even so, even without the support from your family, you could always find sponsors at the time when I was young. So people or companies that will sponsor your trip to a competition in Italy or a masterclass in Germany. So that was normal back in the days.
You being 10 years old?
I started traveling when I was 11 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
For music, yes.
Did this involve performing in front of audiences at that age?
Yes, we are trained to perform since we are 6 years old, because every year in the school you have a final exam, and it's like a concert, so you have to perform in front of a commission, and during the year you have several concerts, so you start performing immediately, even you are very small and you don't know a lot. But what you know, you always go on stage and show it.
Okay. I want to flesh this point out a little bit more. Because another thing that I'm personally curious about is how the process of evaluating music at a professional level is. You mentioned that you're after all studying a particular topic, and you need to have exams of sorts.
Yes.
So the first question, you already talked a little bit about it, but the way the exams are carried out for a professional, somebody that is an aspiring professional musician, do they always involve performance? Do you need to sit down with your instrument and start playing in front of your teachers, in front of your professors?
If it's the exam of your instrument, then you have to play it, and there is a certain amount of compositions from certain style and epochs that you have to perform. So you have to have a Baroque piece, you have to have a Romantic piece, you have to have a Classicist piece. So you have to have at least 4 different periods in music that you have to present. And this starts also very early. And how you evaluate, so in music there are elements that are fixed and that you can really talk about, you can evaluate. There is timbre, for example, that's the color of the sound, or tone, the quality of the sound. The pitch, is it too high, is it too low? This is with not tempered instrument like violin, yes? Can be too high, can be too low.
Okay.
Then there is dynamics, is it too loud, is it too soft? Then there is rhythm, which is the pattern of regular and irregular beats, or short or long beats, or silence. Then there is the harmony, so it can be consonant or dissonant. There is texture, can be polyphonic, can be monophonic. So there are at least 10 segments or elements that you recognize when you are a musician immediately, and you can evaluate. Actually, what you evaluate is how the performer understands, combines, and puts everything together in a performance. What you cannot evaluate, and what is of crucial importance, is also how the performer translates the thoughts and the intentions of the composers and his emotions through his own medium, through his own kind of senses. Okay. So this we cannot evaluate, we cannot put numbers to this, and this sometimes depends of personal taste or personal values.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So
you
before
look confused.
Yeah, you haven't done.
Before that, you said there's like 10, 12 items that can be kind of.
Yeah, you don't write.
Sure.
This is what
But the question here is: can we design a computer program which can judge these things? Like in principle, like something like pitch, like harmony.
The pitch you can, the pitch you can kind of distinguish. Also the tempo or the rhythm you can distinguish.
So there are some things which are obvious.
It's always dependent on the context. Because I can play a composition in a faster tempo and somebody else can take a different tempo or different agogics. And that doesn't mean that my performance is better than the other performance. It's just different. So you always kind of observe the form. How is it all coming together? So this interaction of everything.
No, but this can also be objectively evaluated. But I didn't understand the word timbre actually.
Timbre, also.
Like the color of
that's
the tone.
Yes. I would have to have an instrument to show you.
Sorry, it might be our inclination as natural scientists to kind of get these definitions straight and kind of put it into very neat boxes. But you have to excuse.
Can be a brighter color, can be a darker color, but I cannot express it.
That sounds clear, but when you are when you actually realize that you are talking about a completely different sensorial experience, which is an auditive experience, and you use the terminology that you would use to describe a visual experience, that's when things become.
I understand.
No, but this could like when you record something, so you get the pattern, the wave pattern for it, right? So can you have some elements in that wave pattern which represents color?
Let me try to explain because I think why you're coming. I think I have an idea why you're coming up with this kind of curiosity. Is these 10 elements that you mentioned sound to us as some sort of musical standards that you can grab and make distinct from one another and evaluate to some degree separately, right? You can it's possible to identify them and isolate it. You can identify what's the rhythm. You can identify what's the pitch. You can and there are at least we suppose more or less clear definitions for each one of these categories, musical categories. And what I'm guessing you're trying to get at is that since these elements can be reasonably well defined, maybe you can also set objective standards to evaluate that. And probably the reason why you ask if you could make a computer program to evaluate this is to withdraw the human subjectivity out of an evaluation of this kind of elements.
Yes, but this cannot distinguish the aesthetic quality of the performance. The computer cannot find this.
That's the thing.
But that's what you're referring to. Like after this, you were saying that, but there's this other aspect.
Yes, exactly.
Trying to see the feelings.
You can measure the tempo, and sometimes you can realize this is way too fast. It's not it's not appropriate with the piece. It's not compatible. Yes. So then you say, okay, this part was not so good. But then there are some other things that can be performed in a very good manner, and then you have to appreciate those ones. For example, the melody was played in such a meaningful manner, and it was really well performed.
But the evaluation of a performance involves necessarily another sense other than the auditory sense? Do you need to see the person performing?
You don't need to see.
You can detect
Yes.
somehow through the sound.
Yes. So music is the only art that doesn't necessarily use the sense of sight. You don't need the sight to be able to enjoy or to understand or to feel music.
That is the part that it becomes really a little bit hard for me to imagine.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that through your ears, when you are listening to a particular performance,
Mm-hmm.
you can know things about the, let's say, emotions that are being put into the performance?
Because you don't see the emotions by the movements of the performer. That's it's not what expresses the emotions. You hear them in the music.
Mm.
So absolutely, and so many auditions and competitions work on this way that they are played behind the curtain. So the commission, so the judges cannot see anything.
Yeah, that's
They just judge by music. Also, when you apply for a job in an orchestra, it's always behind the curtain.
Is this what? Okay.
So they are not biased, or if they know somebody who is going to play, they will judge. They will decide on.
Okay, I want to connect this with something I read quite recently in preparation for this episode, which was an essay by Edward Hanslick on the musically beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And if I understood correctly, he argues that the beauty in music is in the form of the piece. And what I think I understand by that is essentially on the musical pattern, on the notes themselves, on the way.
He had this idea that music is an absolute form and doesn't need to be connected to a program, to a text, which you mentioned Wagner before. His side of
camera, just to clarify.
So, yes. So there were some musicians that were arguing that music has to be a part of a program, of a libretto for an opera, of some text. And there was another part that was saying that music is an absolute form and doesn't need to be connected to the text. So it's totally independent.
If I'm correct, he accused Wagner of using basically what he considered to be tricks to put into the music as part of the context that is surrounding a particular musical piece, and trying to use those tricks, those contextual tricks, to charge the music with emotion, and that could be appreciated.
Yeah.
And that I get more instinctively than. I mean, I'm not saying that this is not true. I'm sure it's completely true, and there might be subtleties that just by the mere fact of training your ear or kind of making your musical sense more acute, you would be able to appreciate the quality of a performance just by listening to something.
When you listen to music, you very rarely watch it. Even when you listen to another genre of music, you just play the music. You don't really watch the performance. Even if you listen to pop songs or jazz, So you listen to the music.
And I would be more of a kind of Hanslick kind of man. The music the piece itself would transmit that emotion to me, and I would not know the other contextual pieces that might be at play or not.
Yeah.
That it's making this particular piece, making me feel these particular emotions. That's a part that I was kind of curious about. Now, a little bit more about the evaluation. Just when you had a test in your school, so you sit, you play your instrument, and you're listened by a number of professors.
Yes.
And they are not watching you.
They are watching.
They are watching you. Are they watching also each other?
They sit in a row together.
But in this piece of the narrative, we are still in primary school and high school in music.
No, I'm talking about academy now.
Yeah,
you already.
But all exams are basically similar.
Because I guess at the lower levels, it's kind of straightforward to judge the students, right? Like maybe there's some technique issue.
Yes, exactly.
There is some flow issue. So there
it's
only when you reach a level of a certain amount of training where the fine tuning becomes a bit unclear and hazy and depends on which
I think
the professor is judging you on the basis of what.
I think you can distinguish very early, even with children, when some child has a special talent for it or just doing it. It can be perfectly correct technically, and still you can sense when somebody really has the feeling for it or really has this expressive power.
What I want to get at is this. So, again, in the spirit of trying to find ways to set some sort of standards in evaluating music. So you have these five professors evaluating your performance.
Yes.
And at the end of the evaluation, they will come up with some sort of notes or qualification or a grade.
Yeah.
Does it generally happen that there's an agreement between the different...
I think so, yes. I was fortunate
or do you
not
have
to have
or you have
this
experiences
experience
in which one professor gave you the top maximum grade, and then there's another person who gave you a lower grade?
I didn't have this experience, and I will tell you why. Because I'm always 100% prepared. I was always 100% prepared when I was going for an exam, as well when I'm playing a concert. And preparation is a huge part of any creativity process. Because you cannot become creative on an instrument if you don't know it inside out, as well as you cannot become creative in science if you don't have a deep knowledge of the details.
One would wish to think.
You think you can?
You can get away with a lot of things, yes.
Yeah, but
also to be successful in music, also not in like the kind of formal trained music. But in other formats of music, you don't necessarily need to have everything under your control, right?
So we are like a sportsman, let's say. We have to practice every day, and every day very focused, and it's a lot of hours on a daily basis. So if you are not prepared well enough, that will always show in your performance. So you always want to be really secure in what you're doing, and you always practice also this emotional status. How will you feel when you get on stage, and so the fear cannot block you if you are nervous, or so you are able to perform under any circumstances, whether you're ill or you're not feeling well or you're hungry or whatever. You have to, because you only have that moment or that hour, and people will judge you only upon that.
Yeah, it's a special kind of art.
Yeah, it's a performing arts that like training and practicing.
Yes, it's
for
not
the
like
event
painting where you make the piece before and then you have it. So you create it in the moment, and that's why you're really practicing this moment for a long time.
Yeah.
So I didn't have this discrepancy in the evaluation in professors, but I know of cases, and these are cases always when you judge this sense of, I liked the way
that's where I want to get at.
More or yes.
Because as in the appreciation of any kind of art, there's always a space for subjectivity to creep in.
Yes.
And I wanted to get a sense of how much this subjectivity can create disparities in the final evaluation of a particular piece of music. Yeah. Because broadly speaking, if we talk about plastic arts, if we focus, let's talk about painting, for example. If you focus on abstract expressionism, there's going to be people, mostly, generally the case, the layman, the common public, which will tend not to see the sense and will tend not to see what is particularly appealing about a particular abstract painting. But then you will have, on the other side, I'm tempted to call them art establishment, but that's kind of what it is actually in this case, who will find whatever is of worth in a particular piece of abstract expressionism. And in many cases, with this particular art style, it's not going to be something about the aesthetics of the piece itself, but it's going to be something much more subjective than that. The theory surrounding the current.
Yes, because the purpose of art can be a lot of different things. Can be to communicate ideas, can be to create a sense of beauty, can be just for pleasure, can be for no certain reason. So sometimes it depends on context. So that's why we cannot just say, okay, this is good art or this is not, because you have to have a bit more knowledge about what you're
Are you comfortable with
But,
that?
but,
Okay.
but here you are on the format of the plastic arts, as you call it, you are generalizing over an entire spectrum.
Yeah, that's why I try to focus.
And here, with respect to music, you're talking about like classical trained music.
Yes.
Where I don't know, in these exams that you had, do you have people performing a piece in a very outrageous manner?
Usually no.
But then no, so that's where the abstraction comes in, right? Like if someone performs something in a very outrageous manner, and then you have three judges.
Yes.
And maybe one of them was like, whoa, this is like something amazing.
Yes.
And then the others say like, no,
It's terrible. The worst I've ever
So
heard.
there is a question of subjectivity which really pops in.
Yes.
Or the
And
kind of
when this
personalities.
emotional power is transmitted, I
Yes.
think the judges would appreciate that and would say maybe it's not according to the style, but still it was something original and something that was.
But is
well
there something conservative about your field? Like your judges?
conservative?
Yeah. Like in their readiness to accept change? Like just a question.
I think because probably I feel like you're getting into a risk of mixing things up a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're a classical pianist,
Yes.
for the most part, right? And you can explain this with a little bit more detail. Classical music has certain standards and certain structures,
Yes.
right? And when you are a classical musician, you respect those structures. I
Yes.
assume.
You follow.
You follow
yes.
these rules.
Yes.
Then when you move into another kind of musical style, I suppose that
You follow different set of rules. So only when you are dealing with late 20th and 21st century, when music really crashed all boundaries and
the modernist
new forms are established, only here you can, and then you kind of respect that form. If the composer wanted to be innovative and created some new method, you would know about this because you would study that, and then you try to do this through your own medium. Yes, so because it's a reproductive art, yes, you are not the composer. You're just the messenger.
Your vessel.
So you said from 1920s there was like a revolution in the in the format of classical music.
I would say yes. 20th century was crucial for many things in every segment of life, and so in music. So yes, starting in the, let's say, 30th, 40th, and then forward, a new...
There was the modernist movement.
Modernist, yes, and then post-avant-garde and post-avant-garde, and this is where the traditional harmony and form kind of broke, and there was a new kind of dodecaphony is like a new system was developed, a new compositional system was developed. And so the composers were just experimenting with a lot of things because they just broke all this new time asked for new forms.
That's I want to say something related to that, because this movement of modernism in the 20th century didn't come about just out of a whim. There was a particular rationale to it, a particular kind of set of theory of art that didn't just was related to music, but it was related to all the
general,
arts in general. And
because in this technological moment that we are living, these old forms are no longer compatible.
There was a drive to represent modern life as it is and to break down with the romantic tradition that preceded the modernist period, where a lot of artists and artistic theorists thought that everything that was done before, it tended just to repeat itself and fall into cliches and not to represent modern life. Not the art of the moment at least of the romantic era was not producing any more forms of art that were authentically representing the situation of the everyday life. And the modernist artists tried to regain that, to get some sort of authenticity and to break with all forms, because they thought this is just repeating itself, it's turning into cliches, And there was this word that came into use in that period. It's somewhere, I don't know if it was in Austria or in Germany or probably both at the same time. It's the word kitsch, which is a little bit difficult.
Yes,
difficult
to explain.
To define. I was also reading and listening to quite a bit about this, and I recommend there are 3 lectures by Roger Scruton, which is, I don't know what his professional label is. I would say he's like a cultural critic, and he has 3 lectures talking about beauty and talking about kitsch and fakes and that kind of stuff. And one way, he gives one quote by Milan Kundera, the Czech novelist, to describe what kitsch is.
Yeah.
And he says kitsch is like 2 tears that roll from the eyes of a person when the person is watching children playing in the grass. The first tear says something like, how nice it is to look at the kids playing in the grass. And the second tier says how nice it is to be moved along with the rest of the world by looking at the kids playing in the grass.
Okay.
So this conception of kitsch has to do with fake emotion, not authentic emotion, where the emotion, let's say, of a particular piece of art, it's not in the object of art anymore, but it's in the subject trying to show that emotion that I'm feeling, you know? This is a little bit of a tangent, but I just want to make a comment. This is, I think, a good way to understand kitsch in the modern day and age is looking at social media, for example. You have tragedies all over the world. You have, just to mention one, for instance, recent, is what happened with Notre Dame, right? The church went down, and there was a little like a pouring of feelings about what had happened, what a tragedy, and so on. And then some people started to complain because there was money being raised for reconstruct this church. A lot of money, millions and millions of euros. And there was like an alternative campaign saying something like, this money could end famine in the African continent or something like that. Which is undeniable. It's true. I mean, if you channel that amount of money into combating famine, you would probably make a greater good than rebuilding a church. It's certainly true. But the people in social media posting about this are they're in a sense trivializing the emotion. They're more kind of using this tragedy, which is famine, happening on a mass scale, to be themselves the vessels of the emotion and trivializing the real emotion of the fact. That's closely related to what kitsch is. It's fake emotion. They're not really feeling I deeply the despair that is brought about by famine and these kind of tragedies. It's more about, look at me, how I am moved by this.
But
in art, this also happened, and in the Romantic period is full of that. And the Modernist period was also motivated for breaking away with this fake emotion put into the artistic productions.
So now the question is, music also, it was the same translation?
Music went throughout the Modernist.
Yes, and it's still going to.
When does it end?
It doesn't end, hopefully.
It just keeps on going.
Yes. Well, we can speak about the quality of these modern pieces, because sometimes you have, for example, Charles Ives, who had this idea that everything is music, even silence, and he has this very famous composition, 4:33. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds that you sit on a piano and you don't play. So you just come, you bow, and then you sit, and after 4 minutes you are done.
And it's supposed to be playing in your head.
What he wanted to prove is that nowadays everything is music. So all sounds that you hear, all noises that you make can be classified as music.
Okay.
So this was what was happening in the 20th century. A lot of radical ideas, a lot of tries to create, to be innovative.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Yes.
How do you feel about it?
It's funny because I like his other compositions, and this was very popular when I was studying, because when you're not prepared enough, you could just say, okay, I'm playing that composition. But actually nobody was allowed to go to the exam and play this composition. But it's an interesting...
But it's clear, right, why nobody's allowed to do that, right? If you want to be a professional musician... skill has to matter. I mean, there has to be a way.
You have a lot of years, and of course you can perform other compositions, all compositions.
But
it's just about of the time.
Doesn't that kind of, at least in my head, reveal this as a kind of joke? If this was considered music in the full extent of the word by everybody, if people were very honest, saying, yeah, actually this is music, I'm gonna open the case of the piano and I'm gonna sit, I think it's like 4 minutes 33 seconds, some like very specific amount of time, and this is music, and silence is also music, and the people profess to believe that this is music. This is brilliant, probably, but you're not allowed to do that in an evaluation, right? In any sort of evaluation, you're not.
Well, you can.
Maybe nowadays the things have shifted and you can. But it's the same when a painter paints a totally white painting, and it's white, and it's nothing.
No, but
white, and then people would still contemplate on that and would find some meaning and would put it in a context. And why is it white? Why is it not with some dot of red or something? So
they're also with dots of
or a so black it's dot a philosophical question, and we could question anything like that.
But you need to reach a certain position to do these experiments, right?
Yes.
Like that's
so
the whole thing.
Even those composers, like everybody went to classical school. So
exactly.
Even the most modern modernists, they all know how to compose a fugue. They all know. I know because I was trained to, even though I'm not a composer. So when you go through musical school, you have to know the basis, and only when you know the basics, then you can progress, and then you can try to make something out of it, or invent something new. So you cannot become a composer not learning music before.
And presumably you cannot get away with the white canvas if you cannot master all their styles.
Yes.
One would hope so, right?
I think you cannot. I mean, I'm not 100%
I want to
believe in music also, like you really need, like the power of experimentation is only left to the hands of few, the masters of the whole department. Like,
I think nowadays it's expected to experiment
with even at a
yes. So you learn the basic forms, you have to go through that, and as a young composer, let's say, you are encouraged to find new ways and to express something new. So not to become a cliche or yes.
And in which way you can separate the wheat from the chaff? I mean, if experimentation, if breaking molds, if coming up with original ways of playing music is encouraged, I assume a lot of people are trying to do just that, right?
Yes,
a
but
lot of people try to do just that.
On the concert podiums, you still mostly hear the traditional music, so the traditional classical music, so the epochs that we already know, and it's the composers of the 20th and 21st centuries have their own platforms or their own kind of concerts where only their music is performed, but most of the people don't really appreciate or understand a lot of what is happening. Some are curious and want to investigate, but look at the concert scene. Yes, it's always the more classic things that would attract more attention.
I think there's a
but then where do these experiments happen? Like you have other competitions maybe where you have like masters sitting and judging you.
Yes, you have.
So that's where the experimentation happens, because
when you
only a fine-tuned ear would be able to figure out, okay, that was a cool piece of experimentation.
There are people who are really specialized in this field, and then of course they can judge. I cannot judge a 21st century composer on that
But
scale.
is that really how it works? Because that sounds like the ideal situation. it sounds like the ideal situation that you have a bunch, let's say 10 young artists, 10 young musicians that are trying to come up with their new musical style and experimenting. And then you have somebody that somehow has the capability to distinguish this is good, and only those that are good make it eventually.
Yes.
That sounds like an ideal situation.
This is how it
But
is.
That's a very, very like strategized way of evolving something.
Yeah, that sounds. What I want to get at is that in music, I don't know if this has been the case, but in painting, for example, that's not quite with how a lot of artists make their names. Like
in music, also that's not how. Like pop music or what is in vogue.
Yeah, but
there you see the evolution depends on what the mood is at that moment or what catches on.
The mainstream is a little bit plays by different rules, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I'm talking about.
I think even in art, like if you're talking about recreating the romantics, like a certain era, and you're trying to create art, like fine tuning and evolving that certain specific genre of art may be very different from abstract art.
Yeah. So, what I'm trying to get at is to say this. What I described roughly, obviously, it's a very rough description of what one would expect to be the ideal way to decide which new form of experimentation is artistically worthy and which one is not. But the history of art, at least I'm gonna cite an example from painting, it has not been quite like that. For instance, during the birth of abstract expressionism, a lot depended on who is your patron, which critic chooses you to be the new big thing. That's how we got the Pollock, that's how we got Rothko, that's how we got the big names in abstract expressionism. They were basically handpicked by a very select group of critics that you might call an art establishment, and then they built theories to justify why this particular kind of art is good and what makes art good in this new trend. It was not so much this process of looking at the object and in and of itself evaluate its artistic qualities in a more, let's say, dispassionate or objective manner, and those that follow or fulfill certain criteria, those are the ones that are going to the next big names. So I wonder if that happens in music. If
I
there's
don't
a lot
think
of
that this happens to that extent. What I see as a pattern is that new composers, almost all of them use computers in creating. So they use standard instruments, but they also use a lot of computers. So a lot of sounds and a lot of distorted kind of sounds as well. And I think that I have a friend, a colleague from my previous university, and she's now accepted at Harvard, and she's studying composition there. And I doubt that she would be accepted if she was not innovative enough, and if she didn't use also a lot of computers and a lot of these new kind of techniques. But I think this person and a lot of those people are also very skillful and talented musicians. And I really don't see that it can happen to that extent in music.
I hope so.
That you can have no essence of whatsoever and that you can still become, maybe if you're a pop musician.
But this, the music that comes out after making all the computer manipulations, it sounds similar to what it used to be without all that?
I don't
like
think
the
so.
aesthetic sense remains the same?
It's different. It's different. But we
and
would
they do
have
it
to
live as well?
to something.
Like these musical distortions?
Yes,
Yes,
Yes.
it also happens in live
Yes,
performances.
yes, exactly. So there are concerts where the composer is sitting on a computer and letting some music out, and there is a singer who sings with this kind of music, and so there are a lot of combinations.
But this makes the ballpark kind of exciting, I would say, because there's so much
Yes.
development that is going to happen in the
This
future.
is where
and you
the
have something to look
technology
forward to.
also finds a part.
It is definitely exciting
To see how it evolves.
I have a pessimistic tendency about this situation because I see again what happened to the world of the plastic arts, and I know it's always a matter of taste, and when that happens, there's a lot of like wiggle room for different preferences. But and I know Roger Scruton also writes this in his book. He wrote a very short introduction to beauty. He says that aesthetic disagreements are very uncomfortable disagreements. We even have like a term to express when we like something but we are kind of ashamed of liking that something. We call these things guilty pleasures, right?
Yes.
Like, what's your guilty pleasure, musically speaking? And you say, I don't know, Nelly Furtado, whatever it is. And it's a way to excuse yourself that you actually find this appealing.
But aesthetic judgment is not an empirical judgment. It has to be processed on a more intuitive level. So I don't... You cannot measure.
But we tend to search for an agreement, right? Any art criticism that you come up with implies reasons to convince whoever is listening to your art criticism to say that this particular piece is good or bad, and we should agree on that because of this and this and this reason. Whatever it is, you say you appreciate a particular painting in a museum. You decide whether you like it or you don't like it. And then somebody comes and asks you, why don't you like it? Or why do you like it? You will try to explain reasons from the object or from the context in which the object was created or the theory behind the object that will tell whoever is listening to you it's good. And actually these reasons, after I'm telling them, I hope we can agree on both of us that it's good. So there's always like a persuasive element to art criticism. So it's like a fragile tension between taste is subjective, but I'm gonna tell you why this is good, and I hope we can agree.
So for me, if you ask me how do I judge if some piece is good or not good, I judge the idea that the piece wants to transfer and the form that supports the idea. Does it support the idea, and is this idea a good idea? So, but this is very subjective again. This is not...
I don't think it is so subjective.
This is better than just listening to something and saying, let's see how it moves me. Like if that, because that can be primed by so many factors.
Yes.
I don't
so
think
this is
it's so
it's a lot better than
that.
Yeah.
I think you can give objectively better or worse reasons to defend a particular piece of art. If you're going to put weight on the idea, then there will be some sort of standards that will help you judge whether that idea is creative or not. If it's out of the ordinary, if there is something. Personally, for instance, the way I would look at it is, let's talk about conceptual art, where the piece really doesn't matter, right? Or the piece can even disappear, you know?
Yes.
It might be just like a flash performance.
Yeah.
It might even, there's an ACT exhibition that is going around lately, I don't remember where, but it's called Invisible Pieces. And they have like a podium where Andy Warhol once stood or something like that.
But
right?
he's always pushing the limits, right?
Yeah, there's nothing there, right? Let's say, fine, I'm gonna play your game. Let's judge conceptual art. Yeah?
Yes.
But then you have to raise your standards on evaluating the concept, right? And it's not just like any concept would do.
Yeah.
If I tell you, there's that empty podium right there, and why is it there? Well, because the emptiness of space, it reflects the emptiness of my heart, or whatever it is, right? You will rightly laugh at that. It's so corny, it's so kitsch, it's so bad, and then you should have certain standards to say, I don't think that idea is particularly brilliant.
Yes.
But that has a place in the art world, like the 4-minute 33 seconds piece or the white painting. I think if it is done only once, it has a place in art because it is creating conversation. It is creating a rethinking of making people go back and say, hang on a minute, we are judging things on the basis of that. So the whole process of evaluating art is questioned with these kind of formats. So if you're reproducing, okay, now I'm going to make a pink painting, which is completely pink. Now I'm going to, so that no longer remains art.
But that happens.
But the first step there, I personally would think, because it is creating a conversation on judging what is art, that is a piece of art.
Yeah, you're giving a premium on originality, which I think is deserved, generally speaking, The idea of being original, breaking boundaries, coming up with new things, has some sort of intrinsic value. I agree with that. But as a joke, as Roger Scruton also says, it can only be made once.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It loses punch afterwards.
Yeah.
I just briefly...
No, and more often than not, that also, like 4-minute, 33-second piece
Yes.
is generating so much conversation.
Yes.
So it has value to it.
Yes, and
Good or bad.
it is valued
Yeah.
in modern music because it was something that people never even considered. What is music? How do we listen to music? What do we appreciate when we listen to music? Some sounds are classified as music, some are not.
Yeah.
What is our criteria of judgment? But yes, we can never find the
It's
answer
only
of
if he
this
performs.
question.
All his performances were like that. Like in YouTube, there's this one guy who just sits in a certain still position for 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours
Yes.
consecutively. So I don't know if you will call that art.
Yeah, for me, it's very difficult to classify this as art. But also a lot of these modern exhibitions are very, very difficult to understand, or
Digest.
the way to approach to them, or even if you are very open and you want to really understand, you still question yourself to which extent this is an art form and to which extent it's just here to shock you.
I think a lot of it is kind of an illusion. I think there's a lot of value in the modern art scene put on transgression, on, as you say, shock factor. As if shock factor by itself creates
Yes.
the artistic experience.
Yeah.
Think of Damien Hirst and his sharking formaldehyde, and those kind of things came about because of their shock value. Or think of Peace Christ by Serrano. You know, he grabbed a crucifix and pickled it in urine.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, there was a legal controversy with that whether that should be counted as not just as art, but whether it should be shown in a museum or not, because it offended so many people. I don't care about that. I don't care about art being offensive, but I think my personal feeling is that it's sad. It's a sad development that art depends so much on just being transgressive for the sake of being transgressive.
But I think the quantity will eventually get out some quality.
There more, yeah.
So there will be a lot of things that will be lost, but when you can reach to some kind of quality standard, then that's something new and something good.
I think the problem is in the kind of world we live in, right? Like there's a lot of noise out of which you have to filter out the signal.
Yeah.
In general, even in science, in technology, in what people's opinions are, even with our podcast.
I don't think that's... I'm sorry that I'm pushing back a lot, but I don't think that's quite the problem. I think... I hate to have this kind of talk about having establishments, the establishment in this particular area. Yeah. But I think it's appropriate in the world of art. I think to say that there's an artistic establishment who is made of a small community of people, mostly art critics, they are the ones that actually do have the power to get your piece into the MoMA, into the Tate, into the wherever.
And that makes a big difference, right? Like that there's a problem there. Yes,
I think
the fact that you paint something here, and if it gets selected and put in a certain kind of building,
the context,
the value is completely altered, right? Yeah. So there is a flaw out there.
And the way in which you...
But that doesn't happen in music. In music, you need a certain amount of training.
You have to have... it's very obvious. You cannot be a part of symphony, or you cannot teach other music, or you cannot have a solo concert and hide disability or lack of knowledge. This cannot happen.
That sounds nice.
Yes, because it's very obvious. But of course, there are certain nuances and certain preferences, and some artists get more attention, and some other artists that are maybe even better or truer or more sincere wouldn't. But that's, I think, normal in any segment of life. It depends on luck. It depends a lot of connections. So it is what is happening.
Yeah.
But you cannot be bad, really bad, or not know what you're doing and to become
That's very comforting.
Yeah.
We're getting into the...
Which you don't think happens in the plastic arts?
I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I want to just, because we're getting into the 1 hour mark, and I still have at least 2 questions that I want to ask you, and they're a little bit personal.
Yeah.
The first one is, what do you think art is for?
So
Easy
I
one.
already, I already mentioned something, and I think the purpose of art is very difficult to grasp. But I think the basic purpose is to transfer or to communicate an idea or emotion. So I want to express something, and I want to put something in the public or in the vision of others, and I want to say, and this is what I think art is for. So the ability to communicate to others.
Would you consider then, based on that explanation, that a good art piece is that which, if I observe it, I kind of reproduce in my brain the emotion of the artist, or the intended emotion of the artist when the artist made that piece?
Or you can have your own emotions. You don't need to replicate the emotions of the artist, but when it does something to you, when it moves you from a point, or when you even think about it and it changes your perspective or view or quality of living, this is what I would concern as art.
So you are very comfortable with ambiguity in art.
No, because that can be so influenced, right? Like you can look at this piece in the back, and if someone who you really respect comes and tells you that it makes me feel sad, that already primes you towards having a very negative or a very melancholic emotion about a certain piece.
You mean the influence?
Influence, which if you had just looked at it without anyone around you, it probably makes you feel nothing. So there is that absolute subjectivity there, right?
It's very complicated because you also, when you are exposed to this kind of thoughts or to art in general, then you are you think in a different sense or in a different way. Of course, if a child sees this painting and it means nothing to it and it doesn't really transfers any meaning or any message. But when you grow up and you kind of are exposed to and you think about it and you explore it, then it gets to a very complicated state where you can decide upon a lot of factors. Also, the technical skill of how is it performed. Does that also make an impact on you?
So, for instance, just a hypothetical example. Let's say you compose a piece and you compose it in a state of depression, and probably you want to transmit that through this piece. How does it feel? I wish that the notes that I'm writing down somehow encapsulate the feeling of depression. Then somebody listens to that particular piece and feels euphoric or exhilarated, or it gets a completely different emotional
so that's the failure on the part of the artist.
I actually think it's not quite. It's not possible.
I don't think it's possible because in composition, when you want to kind of convey a sense of depression or melancholism, you will follow different guidelines than when you compose a composition that wants to follow euphoria or anger. So you will use a different material. You cannot build it from the same material.
I kind of wanted to get to that point.
So there is some objectivity there.
Yeah, that's what I kind of
So the musical tones emote differently, and the way you place them together, there are different emotions.
Yeah, that's the direction I was trying to get to. It makes me feel like the room for subjective appreciation is somehow restricted. If you know, like a musical recipe that almost always, or let's say even always, will create the emotion of depression, melancholy, or happiness, or exhilaration, then doesn't that tell you that this particular set of notes following one another have some objective emotional quality to them?
Yes, I think that is possible, and you have this certain harmonies that you can use, or certain musical forms that you can use, or even ways how you create a piece that is not euphorical or but it's very difficult to judge about the quality, because if you only follow patterns, then where is the originality or creativity, or where do you put it? And so, yeah, again, we come to a problematical subject.
The breaking boundaries
Yes.
kind of problem.
Yeah.
Do you have a question? I have one last one. I have another question. Not to expose you, but maybe a little bit.
Okay.
What are your musical guilty pleasures? Or you cannot say this in public because you feel it will affect your reputation as a professional pianist.
Yeah.
No, I just have to think about it a little bit.
Did you expect this question?
No. I didn't, and I wouldn't know how to answer. I really have to think about this a little bit. What are yours? No, it's not about me. No, okay. No, give me 5 minutes, then I will come with
What's
something.
your musical guilty pleasure? Wagner, Mozart. So for us, it works the other way
Yeah,
around.
but Wagner can be a guilty pleasure. Not so many
Wagner
people.
can make it, but I don't know. I think
Yeah.
Beethoven is a little bit overrated.
Okay, no, we wouldn't say this. No.
Okay, playing it safe. But if you think about one, we can write it in the description of the
Okay. No, but actually I'm not limited to listening to classic music at all. I really listen to everything, and my husband recently brought me to a documentary about punk rock
Ooh la
group
la.
of Germany, and I was so shocked that I really liked their music. I really
Which group?
is
which band,
called
sorry?
the Tottenhausen.
Yeah.
I really was surprised by the quality of the music in it. And I cannot understand the lyrics, but what I got, it's not stupid at all.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Did you feel like, oh my god, why am I liking this?
I think you have
That's kind of a yes.
I think you have a weird
No.
conception on music. I'm assuming that like trained musicians are exposed to such a barrage of different musical forms
Yes.
that they are more or less like African samba music.
Of course,
Not African samba. African or samba.
That's innovation right there.
Okay.
Now you got
Try
ideas.
that, yeah.
No, but in principle, like the few musicians that I have met, they have been into so many different formats of
course,
music,
yes.
because I guess they, with the keen ear, they're also pushing the limits a lot more than
I
us.
had my colleagues from my high school. Some of them ended up in pop music, some of them in jazz music. So it's not that you strictly have to do classical music. And so yes, I listen to everything, and I wouldn't mind to listen to a good pop song.
Like Justin Timberlake, that's my guilty pleasure. Right there.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have something else to add? Do you have something?
No, I think it's a good way to finish.
Okay.
How do you feel about wrapping up?
Yeah.
Yes, I always, this is my second conversation with you too, and I like the first one, and now I'm very happy as well, so yes.
It only goes downhill from
I don't know about this. Yes, I enjoy talking to you.
Okay, it was a pleasure having you, and actually we were talking about this off camera, that we were kind of for a while trying to get somebody to talk about a little bit about music and, you know, sliding also into art in general, and I think...
But it's such a huge subject.
Oh,
You cannot cover it,
It is.
in a talk or two.
It is. You
for
need
sure,
to ask
for
my
sure.
girlfriend
It's
how,
like a
how
cosmos.
expensive it is.
Yes.
And how true it is to say that aesthetic disagreements are uncomfortable disagreements.
But are not necessarily bad. It's good to question sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So I think it's time to say goodbye then.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
I thought it was very nice.
Really?
I was thinking the whole time, Nash is so happy that
If you like what we do, please help us continue doing it simply by subscribing to our Podbean or YouTube channel, following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, visiting us on our website tillthebottom.com, or simply spreading the word. Find the links in the description below. The music you hear in the background is a track called Face to Face, performed by Daphne. Thank you for listening, and until next time, cheers.